everyone, my name is Masha, and today I'm going to teach you how to double and how to halve patterns for friendship bracelets. Realistically, you can double any type of pattern, but the ideal pattern type, which makes it the easiest to double a pattern, is a pattern where you have an even number of strings, and also a pattern for which on all of the rows where you have extra strings sticking out of the sides, both of those strings are the same color. Exactly like with this pattern, for example. On row 2, both of those strings are white. On row 4, they're also white. On row 6 and on row 8, they're both yellow, and on row 10, they're again both white. This type of pattern is the easiest to double. So I'm going to do this with the power of editing, which you can also do if you want, but you can also just do this in your head once you're comfortable with the technique. So what you want to do is you literally want to just double the pattern. Copy, paste. Imagine a second pattern to the right of the first one. Now line up all of those bits of string that stick out on the rows. So line up row 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 for this pattern. As we discussed previously, in this pattern type, the strings are the same color, which means that you can do any knot between them. It can be a forward knot, a backward knot, whatever kind of knot, it doesn't matter since both the strings are the same color. So do a knot that you're most comfortable with doing between them, and that's it. You connected the two halves of the pattern. Now treat it as one big pattern. So really you can see that it's quite simple. Now let's talk about all the other situations where you don't have an even number of strings and stuff like that. Take this pattern, for example. In this pattern, you do still have an even number of strings. However, the colors don't match on all of the rows where the strings stick out. So on row 2, you can see that on the left we have red, on the right we have purple, on row 4 we have yellow and green, on row 6 pink and purple, and so on. The basic technique is still the same. You literally just copy paste the pattern either by actually doing that or just in your head, and you line up all the rows together. So now that the red and the purple are together, the yellow and the green are together, and so on. And then you decide which color you want the knot to be. Do you want an extra knot of red, or do you want an extra knot of purple on row 2? Do you want an extra knot of yellow or an extra knot of green on row 4? This is entirely down to your personal preference. You are adding an extra knot. Make sure to think carefully about what color of the knot you want it to be. For this specific pattern, I would probably go with making a knot of the color on the left in the original pattern. So for row 2, I would probably go with a red knot. For row 4, I would probably go with a yellow knot. And the reason I'm saying that is because in the original pattern, you already have 2 knots of the color on the right, and you only have 1 knot of the color on the left. By making another one of the color on the left, you'd sort of balance it out, and that way you would have 2 knots of each color. But again, this is entirely down to personal preference. You can do whatever you like. However, since the strings are different colors, you can't just make any knot. You have to either make a forward-backward knot or a backward-forward knot. So for row 2, for example, if you want to make a purple knot, make a forward-backward knot. If you want to make a red knot, make a backward-forward knot. Forward-backward and backward-forward knots make knots, but the strings don't change position. They stay in the position that they were in, which you need in order to continue the pattern. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's talk about a different situation. What about this pattern, for example? I actually really like this pattern. I did a tutorial on this quite recently. I'll leave that linked in the card and in the description if you want to check that out. It's a very simple and cute pattern to make. But what if I want to double it? This pattern has an even number of strings. The colors don't match for the rows. So on row 2, there's black and white. On row 4, there's black and red. So can't I just do what I did with the previous pattern? Well, let's try that. I'm gonna copy and paste the pattern. I'm gonna align it along the rows. And I'm quite quickly gonna notice that it doesn't align perfectly. The stripes are mismatched. Now I could just fuse the patterns together like this and make a bracelet like that. That is completely up to you. If you like that, you can do that. But what I would probably do is I would want the pattern to match. I would like the stripes to match up. I would like the candy canes to match up. So I would just shift this pattern up a bit, shifting the rows so that they match in the actual pattern itself. And then once I do that, all of the strings align and are the same color, so I can do whatever knot between them, it won't matter. Now let's look at a pattern that has an odd number of strings. The technique that I mentioned previously by just copying, pasting, and fusing won't work since the extra strings on the sides don't match with each other. There is an extra string on row 1 on the right. There is an extra string on row 2 on the left, on row 3 on the right, on row 4 on the left, and so on. There isn't a row where there's an extra string on both sides, so you can't simply mash them together. What I would do in this situation is I would add an extra string on one of the sides so that I end up with an even number of strings altogether. And I would do something similar to the straight edges technique, which if you haven't seen, I highly recommend you watch that. I did a video a while back on the straight edges technique, which helps you keep the edges of your bracelets straight by adding extra strings on the side. I'll leave that in the card and in the description. So for this pattern, for example, I would add a string on the right, and for each of the rows where I have an extra string popping out on the side, I would do a forward-backward knot onto that newly added extra string. That way, there is an even number of strings altogether, and the strings that were already in the bracelet originally don't move position, since forward-backward knots don't move the string anyway, they just make a knot of its color. Once I've done that, I would then copy and paste the original pattern without the added extra string, and then I would align the halves together because now the extra strings match on the rows. And for this half of the bracelet, I would do backward forward knots onto the extra string. That way a knot of the string's color is made, but the strings don't move position, which is what you need to continue the pattern. This one is a little bit more complicated, but hopefully you understand. Now let's talk about what to do if you want to halve a bracelet instead of doubling it. For that, let's look at this pattern. I'm going to assume that if you want to cut a bracelet in half, that means that the sides are symmetrical. And for this to work perfectly, they not only have to be symmetrical, but the column that is right in the middle has to only consist of knots between two strings of the same color. In that case, it's very simple. You just have to identify the middle column, which should be very easy, and then just imagine a line going right through there. Discard the right side of the bracelet and focus solely on the left side. All of the half knots that are left on the right don't matter. Just imagine that there are extra strings that are sticking out for that row exactly how it is for the left side of your bracelet, and just make your bracelet with the resulting pattern. These are the two bracelets that I'm currently working on. One is the halved and one is the doubled version. I'm quite liking how both of these are turning out. I'm also going to be doing a tutorial on how to do double loops for a single bracelet, so keep your eyes out for that. That should be coming next week. If it's already out, I'll leave that linked in the description for you. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. It is a little bit more advanced, it's not super beginner friendly, but I hope you understood nonetheless. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer as many as I can. I post videos on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I'll see you next time. Bye!